Royal insiders are reportedly predicting Meghan could face public booing on a future UK visit, even somewhere as ordinary as a supermarket. That specific prediction came from a well-sourced columnist at a paper the royal family reads first, and it's actually worth working through what she wrote because it reveals something considerably more interesting than a single quotable line.
Are trying to bully William and Catherine into a reunion. They're trying to make a reunion appear inevitable, like we've seen it in all the usual sources, Brittany. People magazine, the Daily Telegraph, who happened to be the people who were leaked the story in the first place.
Let's actually walk through what she's arguing, piece by piece, because there's real substance underneath a headline that could easily get reduced to a single quote about grocery store hostility. Over the weekend, The Sun ran a headline suggesting unity. We're all grinning together, essentially. While separately, the Daily Mail pushed a considerably more combative framing, pitting Team Sussex against Team Wales. That specific framing is worth questioning on its own terms.
I think at this point for Harry, he has worn out his welcome. Definitely here in the United States, we're not a country that particularly, let's say, is super into titles. We fought a whole war over this 250 years ago, so that we don't have kings and princes here. And so it's perfectly fine though for royals to live here. We've had several royals who live here, but they live here in quiet dignity. They're not there splashing their titles, throwing their titles around, demanding respect as if they are in their home country.
The British royal family isn't actually two competing teams. It's one institution navigating an honestly difficult internal situation, and coverage that insists on a cage match framing tends to obscure more than it reveals. Think about what that specific framing actually accomplishes for the outlets running it. A neat two-team structure generates easy headlines, easy social media engagement, easy audience takes. It also flattens a properly complicated situation involving real people, real relationships, and real institutional stakes into something that reads more like a sporting rivalry than an actual family navigating a difficult return.
I've never seen anybody try so hard to fail in my life. It's like they wanted to fail. I've never seen anything so stupendously ridiculous. Launching business after business, there's no identifiable brand. No one can actually identify anything other than wickless candles and runny jam for her stuff. Nobody knows what the hell he does. What the hell does he do?
That flattening might sell papers, but it doesn't particularly help anyone understand what's actually happening here. Alison Pearson, a senior columnist at The Telegraph, the paper that functions by most accounts as required reading inside the palace itself, published a piece this week that's generated real attention precisely because of how directly it addressed the underlying hypocrisy several commentators have been circling for years. Her core argument runs roughly like this. No matter how skeptical you already are about Harry and Meghan's public statements, reality still tends to outpace that skepticism. She specifically called out what she describes as their considerable lack of self-awareness, noting that Harry, in her framing, struggles considerably to appreciate the pain and embarrassment his own choices have caused his relatives, even while remaining fluent in cataloging his own grievances against them.
Truth is, however cynical you are about Meghan and Harry, it's not cynical enough. Their jaw-dropping hypocrisy is only exceeded by their lack of self-awareness and contrition. A champion reciter of his own grievances, Harry can be astonishingly obtuse when it comes to appreciating the pain and embarrassment he has caused his own relatives.
Pearson's central question is fair and worth sitting with honestly. Only last year, Harry was reportedly telling the BBC directly that bringing his family back to the UK simply wasn't possible. So what actually changed? Is Britain no longer the racist country he's previously described? Is Meghan no longer worried about being silenced in his own past phrasing by difficult in-laws? Has the specific danger he once attributed to Camilla in his memoir somehow evaporated? Did they actually receive the apology they'd reportedly demanded as a precondition for any return? Those are legitimate questions, and nobody's offered a clean public answer to any of them.
Judging by the remarks, Meghan will be lucky not to be booed should she ever venture into Waitrose. Has any couple ever burnt through so much goodwill so quickly? She then reveals it is likely that apart from the Spencer side of the family as well as Princess Beatrice and Eugenie, Meghan will find herself ostracized, lonely, and increasingly frustrated. She never liked Britain and is clearly jealous of the huge affection here for Kate.
Run through each one individually for a second, because they're worth taking seriously rather than reading as purely rhetorical. The racism claim was central enough to the original departure narrative that it appeared in the Oprah interview itself, tied specifically to concerns about a family member's comments regarding a child's skin tone. If that concern was serious enough to justify leaving an entire institution and country behind, it's fair to ask what's actually resolved that concern now, years later, without any public acknowledgement of change on either side. The same logic applies to the safety concerns, the in-law tensions, and the demanded apology. Each one was presented publicly as a genuine, non-negotiable barrier to return. None of them appear to have been publicly addressed or resolved before this announcement.
Harry and Meghan, we know again and again, like to try to upstage the rest of the royal family. We are going to see a lot of that, I think, in the next couple of weeks. I think it's going to be a big source of frustration for the Waleses because Harry and Meghan will attempt to do what they can. Harry will follow his brother around, probably do a similar engagement right after William, because we've seen him do this before. So I think avoiding Harry, it's going to be, yes, somewhat easy. But again, there will be inevitably a time when it's a quote unquote family event and the brothers will be invited together. And that will be the true test of things.
Pearson goes further, describing what she characterizes as overwhelming public hostility toward the couple right now. Hostility significant enough, in her assessment, that Meghan risks being publicly jeered even during something as mundane as a grocery run. She predicts Meghan will likely find herself isolated during this return, with genuine warmth extended only from specific corners of the family. The Spencer side, along with Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, while facing considerably more distance from most others. That's a fairly specific prediction, worth taking seriously precisely because it comes from someone with real ongoing access to how this family actually communicates behind closed doors, rather than pure speculation dressed up as insider knowledge. Predicting public hostility toward a specific individual carries real weight when it comes from a journalist whose sourcing has held up repeatedly over years of covering this exact family. Here's the detail that actually matters most in her piece, though.
Even if it's a very innocent interaction between the Waleses kids and the Sussex kids, I can see Meghan mining her children, trying to find information on Catherine and William and their children for her to use later. And I find that exceedingly disappointing, but it just would not be a surprise to Meghan. So even if Catherine and William want their children to have a relationship with their cousins, even that has to be approached with tremendous caution, given who Harry and especially Meghan are.
Pearson suggested that frequent solo trips back to America, with or without the children, could create genuine physical distance between Harry and Meghan, potentially setting in motion exactly the kind of separation process several commentators have already been predicting. That's a meaningful moment, a major mainstream outlet cautiously validating a theory that's largely lived in commentary and speculation until now. Pearson also touched on reports that Meghan may have a UK acting role lined up, offering a dry aside about not realizing the Royal Shakespeare Company was currently casting for Lady Macbeth. Whether that specific joke lands as fair commentary on Meghan's actual talent or simply reflects lingering skepticism toward anything connected to this couple depends largely on how much goodwill you're bringing into reading it.
And so I think William is right to walk away from this particular event because it was so clear, Brittany, that this event was being lined up for Prince Harry. They'd literally organised it in the week of the Well Child Awards. So William isn't stupid. He's like, I see what you're doing here. You're trying to force a reunion. He's not even going to play those games. So this is what Sykes reporting. The date of the in real life aspect of the Diana Awards, which is not exactly a secret but has not been widely publicised yet, falls right in the middle of the big week in which Harry will be undertaking a raft of public engagements, especially around the Well Child Awards and Invictus.
That kind of dry aside says something about the general climate surrounding this couple's every public move right now. A single joking line in an otherwise serious piece of political and family commentary got picked up and repeated across multiple outlets, precisely because it captured something readers already felt but hadn't seen articulated quite that sharply. Whether that reflects properly earned skepticism about Meghan's return to acting, or simply the broader appetite for mocking anything connected to this couple regardless of merit, is worth sitting with honestly rather than assuming automatically in either direction. The genuinely striking part of her reporting, though, involves what she describes hearing from inside Balmoral itself, where senior royals, Charles, Camilla, Anne, Edward, William, and Catherine, were reportedly gathered for their traditional summer break when this news broke. According to Pearson's sourcing, the reaction inside that specific circle was considerably harsher than anything publicly stated. One insider reportedly went as far as describing the announcement as an outright act of aggression.
Harry can simply say, "I'm completely happy to reconcile with my brother, show up at the Diana Awards or any other event and put William in an impossible position." Because if William attends and Harry walks up and says, "Hello, brother," and sticks his hand out, William is going to have to shake it, and he doesn't want to do that. So Sykes says, "Personally, I think the time will come when, for purely strategic reasons, he is going to have to, because fostering the public resentment hands Harry the power to dictate William's movements."
Pearson reportedly expressed genuine sympathy for William and Catherine specifically, describing their position as simply difficult. Her sourcing suggests the Wales household has little actual interest in engaging with anything Harry and Meghan say or do publicly, though she noted fairly that maintaining that distance consistently may prove considerably harder than stating the intention, given Meghan's reported pattern of scheduling her own appearances close to the couple's existing engagements. Now, layered against all of this is a separate story that's gotten considerably less attention than it probably deserves: William reportedly skipping this year's Diana Award ceremony entirely. According to reporting from biographer Tom Sykes, the in-person Diana Awards event apparently falls right in the middle of a week when Harry will already be in the UK for other engagements, including Wellchild and activities connected to Invictus.
And most importantly, Harry needs to apologize, Dan, to his father, to his brother, to his sister-in-law, to his stepmother, to the British people. He needs to apologize for his appalling behavior and what he said. The royal family has held their line with dignity, but Harry has just trashed them every opportunity and then expects to waltz in as if nothing has happened.
Sykes suggests it would be truly unusual for Harry not to attend given his history of participating, even via video link in years he wasn't physically present. Sykes's broader argument is that William's continued absence creates a specific problem for him going forward, that Harry could simply show up at shared events, extend a public hand, and effectively force William into an uncomfortable choice between an awkward public rejection or an unwanted reconciliation moment captured on camera. Sykes suggests William may eventually need to control that first public interaction deliberately, on his own terms, rather than risk having it forced on him somewhere he can't control the framing. Picture the specific scenario Sykes is describing here, because it's worth actually walking through rather than accepting on its own terms.
It's just called being polite, something Harry and Meghan just seem to be unable to do. But this entire process is going to take time. I think if Harry thinks he can just waltz in and bada bing, bada boom, he's back in the fold, I think is very delusional on his part. I think this move for Harry is kind of wildly based in delusion, because you can never go home and have things be the same. And what Harry and Meghan have done in the 6 years with Megxit has made any family relationship exceptionally difficult. He's lost friends, he's lost family. He will never get back those relationships the way they were probably ever.
Harry, according to this framing, walks up to William at some shared event, extends a hand, and says something warm and public. William, in this scenario, either shakes it and generates headlines about reconciliation he didn't actually choose, or refuses and generates equally damaging headlines about a future king publicly snubbing his own brother in front of cameras. That's presented as a genuine trap, one Sykes believes William needs to preemptively diffuse by controlling the terms of any first interaction himself. I think that specific read overstates William's actual constraints here. William is, by any measure, one of the most powerful people in the country in terms of institutional weight and public standing. Any organization hosting an event knows precisely which royal guest actually matters more to their own visibility and credibility, and it's honestly not difficult for an event to simply ensure Harry isn't present if William's attendance is the priority. The idea that William's movements around the country will become meaningfully restricted by his brother's presence assumes an equivalence between the two men's actual institutional standing that doesn't really hold up under scrutiny. That said, there's a fair point buried in the broader argument.
Any organisation is going to know, Brittany, that if William wants to be a part of their event, wants to turn up to their event, Harry is going to have to be kept a million miles away. I just don't buy this idea. And again, I don't like the drumbeat of pressure. Oh, William has to give in. There has to be a reconciliation because otherwise his life is going to be too difficult. No, he can just avoid him. William can just keep avoiding him. And most events will be more than happy to take the future King of England rather than one of the most hated men in Britain.
Genuine family occasions, as opposed to public engagements either brother can selectively attend, present a considerably harder challenge. Christmas specifically comes up repeatedly in this context. William has previously chosen to spend Christmas with Catherine's family, rather than joining the full royal gathering at Sandringham. And there's a reasonable argument that doing so again specifically to avoid Harry and Meghan could read differently than doing so for its own sake. Still, William can reasonably point to prior years spent with the Middletons as simple continuity, which gives him genuine cover regardless of the underlying motivation.
And if they're expecting a warm welcome back, they're kind of a little insane there. And I think they will find out very soon that they're not welcome there. And maybe that's why they're going to try Australia or Canada, because they have to find a place where people will like them. But I think that's going to be a challenge because they seem to wear out their welcome wherever they are.
There's also a fairly practical calculation working in Charles's own favor here, worth noting. Publicly hosting his most controversial family members over Christmas would reportedly cost the monarchy its two biggest global media draws on the one day of the year guaranteed to generate the most public attention, meaning there's likely genuine institutional reluctance to extend that specific invitation regardless of how the broader reconciliation process unfolds. Think about what that specific calculation actually reveals about how this institution operates underneath the family drama. Christmas Day coverage represents one of the few properly guaranteed moments of massive royal media attention each year, and Harry and Meghan, whatever else you make of their current standing, remain reliably the most internationally covered members of this extended family whenever they appear publicly. Excluding them entirely sacrifices real attention. Including them risks the exact kind of tension-filled headlines that could overshadow everything else the monarchy might want the day to represent. That's a properly difficult trade-off with no clean answer, and it's worth remembering that whatever decision eventually gets made will be read by different audiences in completely opposite ways regardless of the actual reasoning behind it. Now, running alongside all of this is a story that's been strangely underplayed given its actual significance. Harry's departure from African Parks, the wildlife conservation charity he'd been formally connected to for a full decade. The organization announced a board refresh this week, welcoming 2 new members while thanking Harry for concluding his tenure after 10 years of involvement. What makes this properly notable is the timing relative to serious allegations that surfaced during his time there. Specifically, reported human rights abuses connected to indigenous communities in areas where African Parks operates. Allegations that reportedly never received a clear, decisive resolution during Harry's entire decade of involvement. That's a full 10 years, worth actually sitting with as a specific span of time rather than an abstract figure. A decade is long enough for a child to grow from kindergarten through most of secondary school. It's long enough for genuinely difficult, complicated situations to get properly investigated, addressed, and resolved, given sufficient institutional will and sustained attention. That a serious set of allegations connected to an organization Harry was formally attached to for that entire span apparently never reached a clear public resolution says something meaningful about how actively engaged that patronage actually was, regardless of who bears primary responsibility for the underlying failures. That's now 2 separate charitable organizations Harry's departed from in fairly quick succession, alongside reported struggles securing new major commercial partnerships and significant, well-documented strain within the marriage itself. Taken together, it paints a picture of someone whose public portfolio has been narrowing steadily rather than expanding, at exactly the moment his public profile theoretically depends on demonstrating continued relevance and purpose. There's a fair question worth asking here about what more active involvement might have looked like had Harry actually chosen to engage directly with the specific allegations, rather than allowing his name to remain loosely attached to an unresolved situation for years. Committing serious, sustained personal attention to actually investigating and addressing the allegations, rather than functioning primarily as a visible patron lending credibility through appearances and prepared remarks, might have produced a considerably different outcome, both for the affected communities and for his own public standing. Instead, according to most available accounts, the situation was reportedly allowed to fester until the organization itself decided a clean separation made more sense than continued association. Compare that specific pattern to how properly engaged patrons typically operate in situations involving serious allegations against organizations they're publicly associated with. The more credible response usually involves visible pressure, public statements demanding accountability, and at minimum a clear public timeline for resolution, even if the patron themselves can't personally conduct an investigation. Silence, by contrast, tends to read as either genuine indifference or a calculated choice to avoid the reputational risk of taking a clear public position either way. Neither interpretation particularly flatters someone whose entire public identity has been built substantially around humanitarian causes and personal advocacy for vulnerable people. I want to be fair here too, because leading a genuine, hands-on human rights investigation into abuses occurring in a specific, difficult-to-access region of the Democratic Republic of Congo isn't necessarily realistic work for someone functioning primarily as a celebrity patron rather than an actual on-the-ground investigator. It's entirely possible the honest failure here belongs more to the organization's own internal structures than to Harry personally. But if his role was actually meant to include real oversight and accountability rather than simply lending his name and face to fundraising efforts, then a full decade without visible resolution suggests, at minimum, a fairly passive approach to a role that reportedly demanded considerably more active engagement. That distinction between patronage and genuine accountability matters more broadly too, well beyond this specific case. Plenty of celebrities and public figures lend their name to worthy causes without ever having realistic capacity to personally resolve complex operational failures on the ground, and it's honestly unfair to expect them to function as full-time investigators for organizations they're simply supporting publicly. The question isn't really whether Harry should have personally traveled to the Congo to conduct field interviews himself. It's whether his public platform got used to apply any meaningful pressure toward resolution during a full decade of association, or whether the relationship functioned primarily as a one-way exchange of credibility for visibility, with the harder underlying work left entirely to others regardless of outcome. Now, there's a separate controversy this week worth addressing directly because it's generated real anger among American commentators specifically. Harry's appearance at Arlington National Cemetery for a wreath-laying ceremony. Let's actually walk through what's specifically being criticized here in some detail, because the underlying argument honestly deserves more than a passing mention before we move to how it's been responded to publicly. Several American commentators have reportedly expressed genuine frustration at what they characterize as Harry using his royal title for a photo opportunity at one of the country's most solemn sacred memorial sites, particularly given his own public criticism of specific American constitutional protections, including gun rights and free speech, during his years living in the United States. The underlying argument is that someone who's been openly critical of core American values shouldn't then leverage American military reverence for what reads, to these critics, as personal image management. There's a comparison being drawn to an earlier, similar visit. Harry reportedly visiting the Los Angeles National Cemetery back in November 2020, apparently accompanied by his own film crew, shortly after he and Meghan had reportedly been declined participation in a UK-based military remembrance event. Whether that specific sequence of events is accurately characterized is worth some genuine skepticism. But the broader pattern being described, using cemetery visits connected to fallen service members as content opportunities, has generated real, sustained criticism from people who otherwise have no particular stake in British royal drama. Consider what makes this specific pattern land so differently than routine royal engagement coverage generally does. Military remembrance carries a particular cultural weight in America, specifically tied closely to genuine national identity and sacrifice rather than the more performative aspects of celebrity culture. When that specific weight gets read as being borrowed for personal image purposes by someone without a comparable personal connection to American military service, the resulting criticism tends to run deeper and last longer than typical tabloid disputes about scheduling or protocol. I want to handle the harsher commentary around this story with real care, because some of what's circulated publicly this week has gone considerably further than fair criticism into territory that's honestly inappropriate to repeat or amplify. Deeply personal, degrading language directed at Meghan specifically that has nothing to do with the actual substance of the Arlington controversy. I'm not going to repeat that specific language here. Whatever legitimate criticism exists about using a military cemetery for image purposes stands entirely on its own, without needing that kind of rhetoric attached to it. And repeating it doesn't add anything except unnecessary cruelty toward a real person. There's also a separate, considerably more serious claim circulating, that Harry and Meghan reportedly sought specific accommodations from the Biden administration during their time in America, including a stay at Blair House, the official residence typically reserved for visiting heads of state and dignitaries, and reportedly even floating Meghan's interest in being appointed to fill a vacant Senate seat following Kamala Harris's move to the vice presidency. I want to be properly careful with this specific claim, because it's a serious, specific accusation about official government interactions that deserves proper scrutiny rather than casual repetition. If accurate, it would represent a fairly extraordinary overreach for two private citizens without any formal diplomatic standing. But the sourcing behind this claim, as reported, remains somewhat unclear, and a claim this specific and consequential deserves considerably more verification before being treated as settled fact. What's genuinely worth reflecting on here, though, separate from any single anecdote, is the broader pattern several commentators have identified. That Harry and Meghan's specific approach to American life differed meaningfully from other royal-adjacent figures who've spent extended time in the United States without generating comparable backlash. There's a fair comparison to be drawn with other minor European royals who've lived quietly in America for years without leaning on their titles publicly or expecting deferential treatment tied to their birth status. The apparent willingness to invoke formal titles in private correspondence, while publicly critiquing the very institution those titles derive from, does create a genuine tension worth naming honestly, regardless of how any single specific anecdote holds up under closer scrutiny. So here's where all of this actually leaves things. A senior, well-sourced columnist suggesting the royal family's private reaction to this return is considerably angrier than any public statement has acknowledged. William reportedly stepping back from at least one shared public event rather than risk an unwanted camera-ready reconciliation moment. Harry's charitable portfolio visibly narrowing at exactly the moment his broader public relevance depends on demonstrating continued purpose. And a properly awkward controversy around using a military memorial site for what critics characterize as image management, layered against unverified but serious claims about entitlement during his years in America. Pull all of that together, and you get something considerably more complicated than either the warm reconciliation narrative or the pure catastrophe framing that different corners of coverage keep pushing. It's neither a triumphant homecoming nor a complete collapse. It's a properly messy, ongoing situation involving real institutional stakes, real financial pressure, real family tension, and real public skepticism, all playing out simultaneously without any single clean resolution in sight. None of these threads individually settles the larger question of where this family actually stands right now. But together, they suggest a return that's considerably more fraught, more actively resisted by the people closest to it, and more financially and reputationally complicated than the warmer public framing has generally suggested so far. What do you think? Does Alison Pearson's specific reporting about senior royals privately viewing this as an act of aggression change how you read the broader family dynamic here? Or is that kind of anonymous insider characterization always worth treating with real caution regardless of the source's overall credibility? And on the African Park's departure specifically, does a full decade without visible resolution on serious allegations reflect more on Harry's own engagement or on structural failures within the organization itself that likely extend well beyond any single patron's involvement? Let me know your honest take in the comments. And if breakdowns like this one are what you come here for, go ahead and subscribe to Palace Insider so you don't miss the next one.